Good morning and welcome to the VIP seat. Today is March 13th, and our top news stories today in business aviation include the big announcements happening at the Verticon trade show this week, as well as the news about the 15,000 near misses at DCA that came out this week. Your hosts today include yours truly, Jessie Naor, and our co-host today is Wren. Kat, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
All right, folks, sit back, buckle up, and let's take off. All right, so our first story this morning, we covered this, I think it was like 6 months ago. The concept was just kind of coming out, but now it looks like it's actually coming to fruition. The Regent flying boat, not an aircraft, it's a flying boat specifically. They took their first dip this week, so it's officially been dropped in the Narragansett on March 3rd. It's their first full-size prototype that they're using for development. The thing seems really cool. Highlights are in hull mode when it's actually in the water. It's going to move at 15 to 20 knots. But in cruise mode, when its hydrofoil is like 30 feet off of the water, it can cruise around 155 knots. Pretty interesting technology that the Coast Guard is certifying and not the FAA this time.
I think it's pretty impressive and really innovative. When I first looked at this article and I saw the photos, it honestly looks like something like a toy, a big toy that my son would play with, right? And pick it up and throw it around playing airplane. It does seem like the design's more efficient, eco-friendly, runs on battery, and would be a good alternate for some of those ferries and boats. And when I think about that, you think about folks that are in New York that take a ferry to do a tour around the Statue of Liberty, or so tourism or cargo or passenger transport. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, it's amazing. I didn't realize this when we covered it last year, but they already have $9 billion in orders booked. They've raised $90 million. I mean, yeah, there's apparently a huge demand for this. The concept is they're going to be competing with the Cessna Caravans and the Otters that do those, like, I'm in Fort Lauderdale. So the Fort Lauderdale, Bahamas, all those island connections, that's kind of their primo market right there. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I don't think we'll use many of those here in Texas, but it is pretty cool to look at. And I even thought about, so there's a new acquaintance of mine who he used to fly or still flies helicopters, but his primary job years ago was to take engineer drillers from their rigs to different rigs, and that was his route. And I thought, could this be an option? But, I think the nautical miles, I think it only read to go 160 nautical miles. And so I think for some of those rigs, I think they live, 250 or more nautical miles. So I don't know if that would be a contender, but when you think about efficiency and eco-friendly,
that's interesting.
Maybe in the future.
Well, and they said, the operating cost is the big key to this. So this model, they think, can carry about 1,000 pounds more than the Caravans and Otters and half the direct operating cost just because of the efficiencies of electricity. But they also said at some point they might develop something much larger, like 100 passenger carrying aircraft. We'll have to see, but I hadn't even thought about, the oil and gas applications because that's a huge industry. And certainly maybe not, in the US where it's pretty far up in the Gulf of Mexico, but you've got England, Norway, lots of those where maybe it'd work a little better than the helicopters that are taking people out to the rigs right now.
Sure. And maybe me being in Texas, pretty close to Odessa and Midland, maybe that's why I thought of it.
That's big business down there.
It is. Big business.
Well, that's actually a really good segue to the next story. So it's Verticon this week, which is, the big, it used to be HAI, Helicopter Association International. They're trying to embrace the eVTOLs and the vertical lift and other formats. So it's Verticon now, which is this week, which is always a lot of oil and gas folks. A lot of people, probably from Texas going to that show. But there's been some pretty big announcements this week. So Robinson, who's traditionally, a smaller air torque type helicopter that a lot of people, including myself, probably wouldn't usually fly in. They are releasing their first light turbine aircraft, the R88. And this thing is really big news. Airbus also released a new model of their 135, 145. Man, this R88, I mean, it looks like it's comparable to a Bell 407, which is
Hmm.
actually very popular down there in Texas.
Yeah, and it looks more modernized. It's pretty, it's sleek. And it made me think of us at ENG, right? And the work that we do with organ recovery. And it also made me think about, again, being in Texas, because they're in our backyard, is CareFlight. So, like I said, here in Texas, they've been operating since like, I don't know, 17 or 1979, excuse me. And they started out with, I think, one Bell 407, and then they're now up to seven. There's a couple different models. But when you think about, how old those aircraft might be and how much they cost, when you look at the cost of this aircraft versus, a 3 to 8 million 407, being a nonprofit like CareFlight, they're saving tons of money with their partners as far as those nonprofit hospitals. And so that was something that came to mind, when we came across this.
Yeah, I think this will, if they do what they say they can do, which is always the question when new aircraft come out, is it actually going to be able to do what it says it can? I mean, it's significantly outpacing what's in the market today. I also, as the safety nerd, I really, really love some of the standard features that they're putting on there. If you buy, a new Bell 407 today, doesn't necessarily have the bird strike windows, the
Mm,
reinforced windows that protect people, doesn't necessarily have autopilot. They're doing that standard on the entire fleet, which I think is really cool. Just bundle it into the price, get everybody using that, more enhanced safety technology. And yeah, for less money, which is
yeah.
good.
With the Garmin avionics suite that I read, all of our pilots love our Garmin avionics in our aircraft, and I think that would be pretty popular. I think it could have a significant impact
Yeah.
in the organ recovery industry. As you know, being in the industry, the allocation process changed back in 2021 that allowed aircraft to go farther to recover organs. But when you think about the transplant centers trying to be cost effective, they lean toward ground transportation if it's within a certain mile radius. And as you know, the lifespan of the organ being out of body in that pump and then to the recipient. So this could be something that you could use intra-city in those busy metroplex areas where it is a weekday, you're in rush hour, and you've got somebody on the ground trying to get from point A to point B quickly. This could be, a solution. Where there would have to be some infrastructure changes in some of those areas and near those transplant centers, but this could really change the game.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I mean, we started out doing organ transplant in a Bell 407 helicopter. That's what we
Hmm.
did. The doctors didn't need the medevac helicopter. They didn't need a stretcher. They just need to take an organ team in a box. But, with the payload of the R88, you're talking about taking a lot more people with you. As to be on Bell 407, we could take 3, 4 packs depending on, distances and weights and everything. But this thing, I mean, they're saying it can accommodate 3,000 pounds, 3.5 hours of flight time, and more than 350 nautical miles of range.
Hmm.
That's, I think about Washington to New York City, for example, that's going well beyond that. So
Hmm.
really, really upping the passenger capacity, and yeah, great application for the organ teams.
And when you think about what was the cost on it, maybe 3.3 million starting versus a brand new CJ3 from the factory that's, just over 10, that is quite a difference. And you could have more supply for the transplant centers to help with a lot of their demand.
Yeah. No, very cool. Well, it was a big show this week. Airbus, their 140s got a ton of orders. The Robinson, they didn't say when it was going to be certified, but they assume by the end of the decade. So I guess we'll stay tuned and see when we get the R88 on the market.
Fingers crossed.
All right. So, next story, it doesn't matter how many times we warn everyone, but for some reason, people still don't realize that there are TFRs over Palm Beach all of the time now. Trump is there almost every single weekend. And the General Gregory Gillio, I don't know how to say his name, the commander of NORAD, he came out with a statement this week because there's been more than 20 violations at Mar-a-Lago so far. The president just got inaugurated a couple months ago. They're having to dispatch F-16s to intercept them. In some cases, they're having to deploy flares to actually get their attention. That's like, guys, come on, read your NOTAMs. What are you doing down here?
Exactly. This is something when there were changes at the White House late last year, our president of E&G sent out and pushed our crew like, hey, you guys need to be aware of what's going on. And those NOTAMs are important. And we don't want flares going on or around, our airplanes if we're down there. And it's rare that we are, but when we are, we need to be ready for everything. And did we read, was it one of the articles that it mentioned that there was a disruption in the system, in the FAA's NOTAM system? And that's the second
Yep.
time it's happened. That is wild. And I know that they have backups for that, but
Yeah.
if you're trying to enforce this, again, modernization, what are we doing?
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think, there maybe you can give the pilots some slack, although it's like, man, if you're flying in Palm Beach, like especially at a training aircraft or something, you should know just generally without looking at the NOTAMs. But the NOTAM system is a mess. Former NTSB chairman Robert Sumwalt, I mean, he said NOTAMs are a bunch of garbage that no one pays attention to, which can be true. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of pilots do, but when you go on the site and try to read through them and sort through them, they're not organized. They're full of just nonsense information. It's not intuitive. It's not easy to read. So I hope the
Mm-hmm.
FAA, in their attempts to modernize, and maybe the Doge team is looking at it. Who knows? But yeah, it's one thing to say, oh, you have to read your NOTAMs, but we also have to make the NOTAMs legible and in a format that actually makes sense for pilots, because they're not going to read them if they're just gibberish, which they often
Exactly.
are.
On top of everything else that they
Yeah.
have to do to prepare for a flight. But it sounds like Elon's trying to fix a lot of things.
Yeah, we'll see. There's a lot to look at in the government, including in the FAA, but I know the NOTAMs have been a thorn in everyone's side for a long time. Although, technology like, a ForeFlight is helping a lot. I think they're
Mm-hmm.
they're organizing that information a little better. But yeah, I mean, you look at a NOTAM sheet and it's got, 50 different lines on it, and buried in there somewhere is a TFR around the president, and you miss it. Eek.
Mm-hmm. No bueno.
Yeah. No bueno. I don't want to be guided by the F-16 back to my base.
Same.
So, just a reminder, folks, it's happening. Just keep an eye out.
Stay away from the flares.
All right. So, speaking of the FAA and improvements, obviously there's a lot of aviation in the news right now, for the good or for the bad or whatever you think of that. The spotlight is certainly on us, which I think can help some things. And in this case, air traffic controllers are getting a lot of attention, which I think it's about time air traffic controllers got a lot more attention,
Mm-hmm.
because they've had hiring issues for many, many years. For those who don't know, I was formerly an air traffic control student. So I went
I
to
didn't know
a
that.
CTI program. Yes, yeah, that was originally how I got into aviation. So my dad was an air traffic controller, and it's like daddy's girl. So I'm like, I'm gonna go be an air traffic controller too. But honestly, I will say the hiring process at that time was really annoying. I went through this college program, took me a couple years to get the degree. I did my ATSAT. I got a 99.9 on my air traffic control aptitude test. And I didn't hear back from the FAA for like 9 months, I think, after I submitted the application. And then by the time I got an assignment, it was somewhere I really just didn't want to be, in the middle of nowhere. So I declined the job. I think they're looking at this now, but it's not just my story. It's the story of, hundreds of thousands of people who have applied for these positions. It hasn't been a great process.
Yeah, we've come across quite a few when I was at business jet at the FBO. As you know, that's a great entry level job and, really get plugged in with the aviation community, waiting for that callback. And it would be months when you're not studying, you're not, it's that muscle memory. And then sometimes you'd get to the point where you would get in there and then they would push back your test even farther for that third or fourth step or the fifth step, whatever it is. So I know that they're paring that down, and I don't know all the steps, but it sounds like they're headed in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah. They said they're changing it from an 8-step hiring process to a 5-step. I feel like it was more than 8 steps, even when I was doing it, but maybe that's just the FAA's internal process or something. But they're going to streamline that. They're also paying, a lot of people don't realize too, when controllers go to Oklahoma City to train, the pay is not great.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but they're going to be increasing that pay by 30%. It's tough, especially like if you're struggling, or someone who's already got to move all the way out to Oklahoma City. You got to figure it out there, how to go to training. And it's not guaranteed either. You might go to training and
Mm-hmm.
you might not make it through. It's a lot of time and investment and energy to become a controller. It is a really lucrative job. I think the
Mm-hmm.
average controller makes 160,000 a year. But if the FAA can reduce those barriers, we'll get more qualified people into the slots.
Sure. And just like you mentioned, it was when you first got maybe appointed somewhere, it wasn't necessarily where you wanted to be. Maybe that boost in that pay will help them make it to the next maybe place or the next step within the air traffic control realm. So it also made me think about,
Yeah.
women in aviation and the Women in Aviation Advisory Board putting out that report back in 22, maybe, where it was only like 16% were air traffic controllers. If we're in need, let's get some females in the door and let's make it attractive, a part of the culture, and to where they feel like they do belong. I know that D&I is very much a buzzword all over now. So I know that that's an interesting avenue, but I think there are a lot of women out there that have
Yeah.
passion and want to be in the industry.
Oh yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, I mean, I don't think I got any points for being a female. I did not. I don't know how the whole algorithm worked and how they selected who went where, because I mean, I had almost a perfect test score. My
Hmm.
dad was a controller, so maybe it was in the DNA. I mean, who knows? But I got sent to this really small regional airport in the middle of nowhere, and I was like, I'm just not interested in that lifestyle. And you have to
Hmm.
spend a couple years, at that facility before you can transfer to another one. While there were other classmates who got, Potomac Trade Con. I wanted to be in a
Hmm.
trade con. That was like my that's where I want to
The
be.
goal, yeah.
And I don't know how that worked. Yeah, and the other thing too, beyond my personal experience with this whole process, Sean Duffy, which I really liked that he put this out there, and I hope Congress actually does this. He's asking the Congress to exempt the FAA from federal shutdowns,
Hmm.
which we all know every time that there's a shutdown happening, it's like chaos ensues. You can't get things processed, and this is a safety organization, so maybe this is one of the ones that should be off the shutdown list.
Absolutely. Yeah. And good on him. Let's fingers crossed again.
Yeah. And I mean, hopefully this is the silver lining. Look, we don't love, all these accidents being in the news all the time. I will say too, just when you look at the data, accidents aren't increasing substantially more than they have in the past. The problem is, once one thing ends up in the news, it just becomes like the news cycle. But
Hmm.
hopefully the industry can use this to actually get some, more funding for FAA. Let's get a new slew of controllers. I hope that's the positive to all the negative we've been seeing lately. Well, and speaking of all the negative, we got to cover it because the numbers are just so absolutely shocking. The NTSB, obviously, it takes a lot of time for these reports to come through, but Jennifer Hamady had a press conference this week and was talking about some really serious issues that had been happening at DCA. For one, there were 15,000 near misses documented just in the last 3 years between helicopters and airplanes at that airport, which is unbelievable. The true definition of that is came within 400 feet of vertical separation and 1 mile of lateral separation, which is not great. I mean, it's not the worst thing ever, but it's a little close for comfort. The other thing that they unveiled was 85 incidents that actually came within 200 feet of each other. So this has been a really known issue at that airport for a long time, and it seems like complacency had just completely set in.
Hmm. Yeah, that's pretty scary. And it's one of those things that you'll talk to pilots or you'll talk to anybody in the industry who knows that this stuff happens, but not at this close of a range, right? And now it's in the news, like you just mentioned, it's on a loop because of the recent accidents. And so, but why hasn't somebody raised their hand after months of this happening?
Yeah, it's just wild, and I also have to wonder now they're going through and they're actually analyzing other airports for the same issue. Um, eh, it's so complicated. Obviously, we don't have the full report from NTSB yet, but clearly there was pilot error involved, and now they're talking about shutting down all helicopter operations within DC, which I think is there's a pro and a con there. As long as we can still get medical aircraft into the area, I think that's fine. But it is a shame that like this was a known issue. This was a known problem. It was happening over and over and over again. So I don't think it's going to be fair to blame the pilot. I mean, yes,
Hmm.
the pilot did ultimately impact this situation, but when you have the environment like that and when it's over and over and over again, like who's responsible for checking that? For saying
Exactly.
we obviously have a risk here. Yeah, how many incidents have to occur? How many, separation issues have to occur before they say, oh, maybe we should like change this route. And I don't know what the
Hmm.
oversight process is for that. Is it air traffic control, FAA? Who makes those calls?
Right. Pilots of these aircraft that are getting these notifications of how close these other aircraft are, I know that they get submitted, but who's looking at it to then make changes or raise their hand, or who's going to own it? Just exactly to your point, which is scary. But and my heart hurts for all the family that was involved. But it's one of those things that at least it is in the light, and it sounds like we're going in the right direction for not only that airport, but across the nation to make sure that we're doing what we need to be doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this seems like a pretty simple data problem too. These are recorded incidents. When there's
Hmm.
minimum separation between aircraft, there's a little dot that starts to show up on the radar screen, and that has to get
Hmm.
mitigated. And if it doesn't, there's a report filed. Or, even if it does get mitigated, there's a report filed. I might imagine at this point they're going through, all right, where are our highest incidences of this separation problem, and how do we get rid of it? Just such a tragic situation all around, but I hope it's for the best. I mean, you always hope for something positive to come out of something tragic, and hopefully that's happening.
Absolutely.
Well, speaking of that, and not to do a shameless plug, but I am a little excited because last week I actually launched a nonprofit for private jet consumers. I think the industry has a history of kind of talking to itself when it comes to aircraft safety and aviation safety. So I wanted to start something that was not funded by industry. So people can go to this website. It's flyingprivate.org. And we've just gotten started, but we're putting in NTSB records, FAA records, anything that we can find so that consumers can just start to do their own research. Because I think honestly, it's been hard. You have to go to the NTSB website, and digging through that thing is it's archaic, it's
Hmm.
at best. And searching it is difficult. So for anyone listening out there that's trying to look up some information, please check it out.
I know we will. Well, I'll share it with my team. And good for you. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm excited. Oh, and also too, it's just a good way to look up, legal operators. It has every single tail number in there that's on FAA certificates right now. Hope it's a valuable resource to the industry. And at some point we'll try to figure out how we pay for the research, but for now it's just out there. So enjoy.
That will come.
It'll come later. I just focus on the free first, and we'll make it work.
There you go. There you go. I like it.
Well, cool. Well, I mean, anything happening at ENG that you want to talk about? Any news? How's your organization doing?
It's great. As you know, I've been on board for almost 10 months now, and we are up to 3 airplanes. So 3 aircraft, primarily in the Texas region to support, Houston, Dallas transplant centers. We're pretty thrilled though. Or 2 weeks ago, excuse me, we launched our ground operation so we can really serve the community in all capacities. So we have 2 vehicles up in the Dallas Fort Worth area right now, and we're looking to have 2 more in Houston. And really, we've got a heat map of the U.S. where we're really targeting trying to be close to those major transplant centers, and we want to have 1 to 3 airplanes, and then with that per airplane, we're going to have 2 more cars to help support that to get the surgeons where they need to go and those organs back to those recipients. So we're thrilled. It's been nonstop. We've got a lot that we're juggling as far as marketing, and we've got a big transplant conference coming up in May. So as you know, conference planning, all the booth juggling, getting badges and all that stuff. So we're pretty thrilled. We've got a lot going on, and really looking to take a bigger step in the transplant coordinator space too. So we'll see what this year brings.
Well, that's very exciting. I know from personal experience how rewarding that industry is and how difficult it is for these transplant groups to find good operators. So I definitely salute what you guys are doing, and I know it's needed. So yeah, I'm sure you'll have continued growth.
Well, thank you. I may get with you. As you know, the transplant community, they're not fully aware of, how to vet an operator. So it is one of our goals to be an educator, very much just like you are, a platform that's not just the ENG brand, but it's really just educating the community on the right questions to ask and what to look for. What is an SMS? And, sharing that with the transplant centers and those organ procurement organizations who dispatch a lot of these airplanes. So we're looking forward to that being one of our goals for this year. And I don't know, I may lean on you for some.
Anytime. Yeah, well, that's part of the reason I'm putting that out there. It's just consumers just don't understand, especially I think transplant teams too. They're just like, just give me an airplane. And it's like, okay, but like we want to make sure, even though yes, there is an emergency, yes, their life is on the line, saving a life is on the line. We still have to be safe. That doesn't mean we can make bad decisions just because we're in a hurry, as you guys know, as a transplant operator. But it's a tough thing to juggle for sure. There's a lot of pressure in the industry.
Yeah, it's, they're worried about their bottom line, which we can understand. And so we've been very flexible and nimble with, changing up our pricing model or implementing discounts where needed, just so they can see that we're in it for the long haul, and we understand that some of this comes from their bottom line. So we're here to be flexible and see how we can just be better. And we always say at ENG, we want to be the easy button. So that's our goal.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up the pod today. But thank you for joining us. The VIP seat is one of the fastest ways to get news in business aviation each week and talk to wonderful people like Kat and have great conversations about what's going on in the news. So make sure you're following us. Comments and suggestions are always welcome. And we'll see you next time on the VIP seat.